Today's experience was sent to us by an elder, a once dedicated Muslim. He died and met Jesus. There were many questions that many Christians and Muslim battle with that he was given clarity. That marks his turning point. Kindly stay to the end to understand his experience. My name is Rajuya Mohammed. I grew up in a home where faith was more than just a tradition. It was a way of life. The sound of the adhan, the call to prayer, was as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. From the time I was a child, I watched my parents bow in prayer, their voices soft but firm as they recited the verses of the Quran. My earliest memories are filled with scenes of devotion. I remember waking up before sunrise, still sleepy, to join my father for Fajr prayer. The coolness of the water during ablution would jolt me awake as I washed my hands, face, and feet, preparing to stand before Allah. I would follow my father's lead, bowing and prostrating, my small voice trying to match his as I recited the verses I had learned. The mosque was like a second home. I'd sit cross-legged on the soft carpet, listening intently to the Imam's words. My mother often reminded me, the mosque is not just a building. It's where we find guidance and peace. Faith shaped everything in our lives. Our meals began with Bismillah and ended with Alhamdulillah. Every decision, no matter how small, was framed with the question, what pleases Allah? As a child, this gave me a sense of purpose, a direction in life that felt steady and unshakable. I took pride in learning the Quran, memorizing surahs, and understanding their meanings. Each verse felt like a treasure, revealing truths about life and the universe. My mother often sat with me, gently correcting my recitation, her face lighting up with pride when I got it right. There was a rhythm to our days, a structure rooted in prayer and devotion. 5 times a day, I would pause whatever I was doing to bow before Allah. Whether I was at school or playing with friends, the call to prayer was a reminder of what mattered most. As I grew older, my understanding of Islam deepened. The Quran became more than a book of recitations. It was a source of guidance, a lifeline to understanding life's complexities. I spent hours studying its verses, delving into the hadiths to learn more about the Prophet Muhammad's teachings. One of the central lessons instilled in me was the importance of deeds. Salvation wasn't just a matter of belief, it was tied to how one lived. My parents often said, "Your actions are your prayers written in motion." Whether it was giving to the poor, showing kindness to neighbors, or keeping my word, every deed mattered. It was as if life itself was a ledger, with good and bad recorded in a balance that would one day be weighed. Yet, with all this clarity, questions began to surface as I grew older. Late at night, after my family had gone to bed, I would sit by the window and stare at the stars, letting my thoughts wander. The vastness of the universe made me feel small, yet it also filled me with wonder. I would ask myself, who is Allah, truly? What does it mean to be infinite? Can I ever really comprehend His nature? Sometimes, doubt would creep in, a quiet, unsettling voice in my mind. It wasn't that I questioned Allah's existence, but I struggled to grasp His plan. Why do some people suffer while others live in ease? I would ask, if Allah is all-knowing, why is it necessary for us to prove ourselves through deeds? These moments were not ones I spoke about openly. Doubt felt like a heavy burden, something that might be misunderstood by those around me. Still, I held on to my faith, knowing that even the Prophet himself had faced challenges and moments of deep reflection. During those nights, I would often turn to the Quran, seeking answers in its verses. Some nights, I found comfort. Other times, I was left with more questions. My prayers took on a new tone, more raw and personal. I would whisper, "Ya Allah, help me understand. Strengthen my faith and guide me to truth." While Islam was the center of my life, I was taught to respect other religions and the people who followed them. My parents would remind me, Allah commands us to treat others with kindness, regardless of their beliefs. This foundation of respect made me curious about Christianity, which was widely practiced in my community. At school, I had Christian friends who would occasionally talk about their faith. They spoke about Jesus with a deep reverence, describing him as the Son of God and the Savior of humanity. I listened, intrigued but unconvinced. The idea of the Trinity, 3 persons in one God, was something I couldn't reconcile with my understanding of Allah's oneness. Islam taught me that Allah is indivisible, unique, and without equal. To think of him as part of a triune nature felt, to me, like diminishing his majesty. One of my Christian classmates once explained salvation by grace, saying, "It's not about what we do but about what Jesus has already done for us." To this, I replied, "But isn't it more meaningful to be judged by our deeds? Shouldn't we earn our place in paradise by living righteous lives?" The idea that someone else's sacrifice could secure salvation for everyone seemed, in my eyes, to undermine personal accountability. These differences often led to lively debates. After school, we'd gather in small groups, exchanging arguments and defending our beliefs. I would quote the Quran, emphasizing Allah's oneness and the importance of submission to His will. My friends would respond with verses from the Bible, pointing to God's love and the message of salvation through Jesus. One conversation stands out in my memory. A friend said, "If God is all-powerful, why couldn't He come to earth in human form to save us?" I paused, considering his words before responding, because Allah doesn't need to. He is above creation, beyond human limitations. He guides us through His prophets, not by becoming one of us. While our debates were passionate, they were never hostile. I respected their commitment to their beliefs, just as they respected mine. These discussions deepened my understanding of Islam and strengthened my conviction. Defending my faith required me to study more, to better articulate why I believed what I did. At the same time, my curiosity about Christianity grew. I began reading parts of the Bible, not to challenge my beliefs but to understand theirs. I wanted to know why they held onto doctrines that seemed so foreign to me. Through it all, I remained firm in my faith, convinced that Islam provided the clearest and most complete understanding of God's nature and will. It began as a dull ache in my chest, something I brushed off as stress or exhaustion. Life had been demanding, work, family, and the ever-present call to remain steadfast in faith. But that ache quickly turned into something more. By the time I found myself clutching my chest, gasping for air, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore. The ambulance ride felt surreal. As the sirens wailed, I tried to focus on the words of the Shahada, whispering, "La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah." Yet, fear gripped me. I wasn't ready to meet Allah. What if my deeds weren't enough? What if I hadn't done all that I was supposed to? My thoughts were consumed by the reality of death. I had recited verses about it countless times, but now it wasn't just words. It was here, hovering close, undeniable. At one point, the pain was so intense that everything around me began to fade. I became aware of something strange. My body felt distant. It was as though I was no longer in it. I could see myself lying on the hospital bed, pale and lifeless, surrounded by the medical team. Yet, I wasn't there. The detachment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. There was no weight, no physical sensation, just a profound awareness. I felt suspended in a vast expanse, neither dark nor light, but peaceful in a way that defied explanation. Time seemed to dissolve, and for a moment, I wondered if this was what it meant to leave the physical world behind. But then, a wave of fear swept over me. Was I ready to face Allah? Had I truly lived in submission? Had I prayed enough, given enough, repented enough? My entire life flashed before me, not as a sequence of events but as a reckoning of who I had been and what I had done. My thoughts had quieted, my fears momentarily stilled, and that's when I noticed it. A faint glow, unlike anything I had seen before. At first, I thought it was a trick of my eyes, perhaps the result of exhaustion or medication. But the light wasn't random. It had a presence, a purpose. It shimmered softly, growing brighter and fuller with each passing moment, yet it didn't hurt to look at it. Instead, it drew me in. The light seemed alive, warm, and inviting. As it grew closer, I felt something shift within me. The fear I had been carrying, fear of death, of judgment, of the unknown, began to fade. In its place came a peace so profound, it felt as though it were wrapping itself around me, like an embrace from something greater than I could comprehend. I wasn't walking, yet I felt myself being drawn toward the light. There was no urgency, only a gentle pull, as if it were calling me to come closer. The warmth radiating from it was unlike anything physical. It wasn't just on my skin but deep in my soul. It felt like love, pure and unending, flowing into every part of me. As I neared the light, I realized it wasn't just a glow. It was a doorway, a passage to something beyond this world. Though I couldn't see what lay on the other side, I felt its reality. It wasn't empty or void. It was full of life, truth, and beauty beyond anything I had ever imagined. I paused at the threshold, a mix of awe and hesitation in my heart. Could this be a vision of paradise? Was I being shown a glimpse of what awaited the faithful? Or was this something else entirely? A revelation, a calling, an invitation to understand a deeper truth? I became aware of someone near me. I couldn't see them at first, but I felt them. An overwhelming sense of love and compassion filled the room. A love so pure it made me want to weep. And then I saw him. Standing before me was a man, his figure radiant yet gentle, as if the very essence of light and life flowed through him. His eyes were unlike any I had ever seen, deep, kind, and full of understanding, as if they saw every part of me. My doubts, my fears, my struggles. Yet, there was no judgment in them, only love. "I am Jesus," he said, his voice calm and steady. The words were simple, but they struck like thunder in my heart. My mind raced. Jesus? The prophet Isaiah? But this was not how I had imagined him, not the way I had been taught to think of him. He wasn't just a revered messenger or teacher. There was something about him, something unmistakably divine. He spoke again, his words cutting through my turmoil. "You have sought truth your whole life," he said, "but the truth is standing before you now." I wanted to speak, to respond, but the words wouldn't come. My heart felt heavy with questions I couldn't form, with beliefs I had clung to for so long. "How can this be?" I finally managed, my voice trembling. "I've followed the teachings, I've tried to live a life of devotion. But it's not what I was taught." His gaze never wavered. "You know the words of the prophets," he said. "You have studied the scriptures. But I am the fulfillment of those words. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." His words shook me to my core. I had debated Christians before, dismissing these very ideas as misunderstandings or distortions of the truth. And yet, here he was, speaking them to me, not with arrogance or force, but with a quiet certainty that I couldn't deny. I struggled to process it all. But salvation, it comes through deeds, through obedience. Jesus stepped closer, and his presence seemed to envelop me. "It is not your deeds that save you," he said gently, "but the grace of God. I am that grace, given for you, so that you may know the fullness of his love." Tears streamed down my face. His words weren't just challenging my beliefs. They were reshaping them, breaking down walls I hadn't even realized were there. And then, in that moment, I felt it, the profound realization of who he was. He wasn't just a prophet. He wasn't just a teacher. He was the Son of God, the Savior. The room seemed to blur as his presence filled every corner of my soul. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed, unable to do anything but cry out, "Lord, I believe." As I knelt, still reeling from my encounter with Jesus, my surroundings began to change. It was as though time folded in on itself, and I was transported to moments that felt more real than any dream. The first scene came alive before me. A crowd gathered in anticipation as Jesus stood at the center. A blind man approached, stumbling, led by others. Jesus reached out, his touch gentle and deliberate. "Your faith has made you well," he said, and instantly the man's eyes opened. Tears of joy streamed down his face as he fell to his knees in gratitude. The crowd erupted in amazement, yet Jesus' focus remained on the man, his compassion evident in every word and gesture. The vision shifted, and I was in a small room filled with warmth and candlelight. Around a table sat Jesus and his disciples. I realized I was witnessing the Last Supper. His voice was steady as he broke the bread, saying, "This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." He lifted the cup and continued, "This is my blood, poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." The love in his words was profound, yet there was also a solemn weight, as if he knew what lay ahead. Suddenly, I was in a garden, dark and quiet except for the sound of Jesus praying. His anguish was palpable as he knelt, his forehead pressed to the ground. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me," he pleaded. But then, with a voice filled with resolve, he added, "Yet not my will, but yours be done." The depth of his submission and love for humanity struck me like a thunderbolt. The next scene was harrowing. I found myself at the foot of the cross. Jesus hung there, battered and broken, a crown of thorns pressed into his brow. The crowd jeered, but even in his suffering, his love radiated. He looked down at those around him, his mother, the disciple John, even the soldiers, and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." As the scene unfolded, the sky darkened. With his final breath, he cried out, "It is finished." At that moment, I understood. His death was not just an act of sacrifice but the ultimate expression of love and grace. He bore the weight of the world's sins so that all could be reconciled to God. As the encounter with Jesus deepened, the scene around me shifted once again. I felt as though I was being transported to realms beyond my understanding, places that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of time and space. The first was a place of indescribable peace and beauty. The air itself felt alive, resonating with a harmony that seemed to echo God's presence in every corner. Colors were more vibrant than anything I had seen before, and there was a deep sense of joy, unity, and love. People were there, their faces radiant, free from worry or pain, all basking in the glory of God. There was no fear, no division, only the overwhelming presence of love, pure and untainted. Jesus stood beside me, his gaze filled with compassion. "This is the fullness of life," he said. "To be with the Father, to know him as he is, and to share in his love forever." I wanted to stay there forever, to soak in the peace and joy of this place. But the vision changed. I was now in a realm of darkness. It wasn't the kind of darkness that comes with night but a deeper, oppressive absence of light. There was no love, no peace, no sense of God's presence. Instead, there was an overwhelming emptiness, a void that felt like separation itself. The cries of anguish in the distance pierced my soul. It wasn't the kind of suffering caused by physical pain. It was the torment of regret, bitterness, and despair. It was the unbearable reality of being cut off from God, from love, and from hope. I turned to Jesus, my heart trembling. "Is this hell?" I asked. He nodded, his expression heavy with sorrow. Hell is not a place created to punish, but the inevitable result of separation from God. It is the choice to reject his love and grace, to cling to self over surrender. I struggled to comprehend. Why would anyone choose this? He looked at me, his voice gentle yet firm. Love requires free will. The Father does not force anyone to love him, to accept grace, or to live in relationship with him. But to reject him is to reject life itself, and this is the result. It is not his desire for anyone, but each person must decide. His words pierced my heart. I thought of the times I had dismissed the idea of grace, convinced that my own efforts were enough. I thought of those who, like me, had been striving for a God they feared but did not truly know. Jesus continued, "This is why I came, to offer the way back to the Father, to make grace available to all. But the choice remains with each soul. Love cannot be forced. It must be received. The weight of his words settled on me. Heaven and hell were not merely destinations. They were reflections of our choices and relationship with God. To be with him was life, love, and joy. To reject him was to embrace separation, emptiness, and despair. Suddenly I was back to myself in the hospital. All right, friends. This brings us to the end of today's experience. Kindly like and share this video with your friends and families. Kindly subscribe to our channel and turn on your notification bell icon to be the first to get updated anytime we upload a new experience sent to us. Remain blessed.